Hello ladies and gentlemen, my name is Decryption and I hope you are well. So we're going to be carrying on with our AI series in today's video, and this time we're going to make it so when each guard walks up to any specific patrol point, we can configure the patrol point to tell the guard to do something in a specific way. So it might be the guard has to say some dialogue, or they have to wait there, or they'll play a unique animation. So let's get started. So if you've seen my previous video on making the Grand Theft Auto Medic style missions, I'm actually going to move the AI state tree thing, instead of this map, into a dev map of its own, just because when I click play, this level has got 22,000 actors. I'm still organising it, making it smaller and stuff, but it takes a while to load, as you can imagine, and a dev map's instant. I'm just going to press Control or Command N to create a new level, and I'm going to go empty level, create. Inside here, I'm just going to add a super basic plane, which will act as a floor. I'll just set it to about 100, just so we've got a nice little floor. There's no need for a whole landscape or anything. I'm going to set the basic shape material to the world grid material. I'm going to set the material to the prototype grid. I'll just use the material instance for grey here. You can see when the shaders compile, we've got this nice little thing here. It just gives us a nice way to see the distance of things. And then you can add some basic lighting or skying if you want to. For me, I'm just going to come and add ultra dynamic sky and weather, just so we've got something super basic. Add that in the center. And then I'll just make sure on the weather to set it to clear skies. There we go. Because now we've got nice even lighting in the map and we've got a nice demo play. The final thing I'll do is just add in a player start. So the player starts bang on in the center or wherever I need him to, and we can now save. And now I'm going to jump into my maps in my dev maps folder, and inside here I will just call it m_state trees. There we go. So now let's actually add our state trees into here, then we'll actually crack on adding the custom actions. So let's go and find a guard. So I'll go blueprints, NPCs, and we'll just drag in the NPC guard here. Let's put him relatively near the player. Then I will come and load up our previous editor script that we created, the editor patrol points, and I'll just run that. I'll just dock it over here just for a little, just so we've got access to it. I'll come to AI, and then the final thing I will add is our patrol point, drop it right there, and then from here, I'll just press Alt-J to go to the top view, or another tool I found out, if you press the middle mouse button down, holding Control or Command and point up, it will flip you into the direction that you want to go. How cool's that? So if I hold the Control or Command key and press the middle mouse button and drag up, it'll put me in the top view like that, which is really, really nice. Then I'm going to click Add Next Patrol Point, and I'll drag this out over here, and we'll just make him basically do a circle around the player, I think. And then finally, I'll click these two, and then I'll add a patrol point between, and then move it into the middle like so. And now we have a patrol point successfully going all the way around each one. With some minor rotations just to make them line up, we now have all the patrol points set up. So he will basically just walk around the player, hopefully. We'll definitely go and improve these lines in the future. I've got another idea of maybe doing a vehicle waypoint style system where you have arrows on a plane going around. That might work. It's something we can look into. So I'm going to tap this guard, just simply going to tell him to follow this patrol point. So I'll click it and tell him to follow that one. Loop forwards will just make him always go in the right way. And the final thing is we'll just set his controller to be the patrol controller. And the final thing, we just need to add a nav mesh just so he knows how to actually walk around. It doesn't really necessarily need to be a big one. So we'll just scale it up just so it matches just where he needs to walk. You press the P key, you can also see when it compiles there. So that's his radius he can walk. So now if we click play, the reason I love these dev maps is it's instant. Just as soon as you click play, you're in. And there we go, we can see he is now walking, and he will walk to all the patrol points. I've noticed he's snapping as well, which is something we can fix another day, but there's just a tick box we can tick where he'll orient nicely to it. There we go, so nice basic patrol point. So where do we start with the custom actions? So it kind of depends on how many custom actions you have and what you want. For me, there's really only 3 basic ones that they can do before we start going into whole smart objects, which will be something we'll touch on eventually. So smart objects are for the complicated styles. So going to sit on a bench, looking through a bookcase, taking over something that other NPCs shouldn't be doing at the same time in the area. So if you watch a game like Skyrim, you'll see the NPCs will just walk up to a bench and sit down. No other NPC will sit in that position on that bench. That's a smart object. It's an object that's been used smartly. You can use smart objects for basic things, but I don't personally see the requirement for it. If you're going to use smart objects, use them smartly, otherwise just use something basic. So for the 3 basic ones I'm going to do in this tutorial, we're going to do waiting. So we'll have the guard walk up to a patrol point and he'll just wait. He'll just stand there for a minute. This will be good if you've got a patrolling NPC where they walk up to a gate, they'll just wait there for a minute, acting like they're looking through it and then walk away, giving the player time to sneak around. The second thing we're going to do is the dialogue, where the guard will walk up and they'll say something like, it's a rainy day today, or, something really cringy like they normally do. And then the third one is the play animation action, where they'll go up and they'll physically just play an animation. They might kick a stone on the floor, they might look around or something. Something just generic to sell that they're actually a person living in this world. And the way we're going to create these actions is you can actually pair all 3 of them up together. So if you want a guard to walk up, play some dialogue and play an animation, we will make it so they can do that. So we're going to try and make it so all the actions we create can be used in sequence, maybe some, not others, either way you want it to work. To add it so you can really customize it. So if you did want a guard to walk up to a gate, look through it, play an animation of looking through the gate, and then say the words, it's very dark in there, and then walk away, we can do that. Or if you want them to walk up, wait for 10 seconds, where they just kick a rock on the floor, then just stand looking forwards, we can do that. Maximum flexibility is what we're going for here. So let's get started. Where do we start? So we need a way to actually tell each of these nodes if they've got a custom action on it or not. And if they have, what they are supposed to do. So the first and easiest one is actually the waiting. When the guard arrives here, do they need to wait? And if so, for how long? I'm going to open up my BP patrol point. I'm just going to come and add a custom variable called wait time. I'll set it to a type of float, and I'll make sure it's instance editable. And by default, I'm going to set it to 0. So when the guard reaches it, he'll just go straight past it. That's what we want. But then in the actual world here, I will say when he gets to this patrol point here, he has to wait for 5 seconds before he can move on. And then we'll do it to this one as well, just so we can see a difference. And now let's actually tell him to start using this. I'm going to open up my AI folder and I'm going to open up my ST patrol, my state tree. But what I'm planning is we're going to add in between the go to the patrol point and when he arrives to it, we're going to add all the different actions that I need to do, and then he'll get the next patrol point and then walk to them. That's the plan. So after go to patrol point, I'm going to right click, add state, and I'm going to do an add sibling state to add a state just under it. And I'm going to call this custom NPC actions. And then we'll add it all as child states inside here. So I'm going to right click this custom NPC actions, add state, add child state. So we've got one inside it. And this first one will be should NPC wait. This will have a custom condition on it saying should the NPC wait at the current patrol point. So we're going to add a condition to this one and we're going to set it to a float compare. We're going to open it up and we're going to say if the operator is greater than 0, then we actually just need to set it to the current patrol's details. But this is where we run into a little bit of an issue with state trees that we are still trying to figure out, but hopefully it will either be added or something will shine a light on it later. But we need to now get the NPC's current patrol point, the one they're currently at after they've moved to it. And using parameters or evaluators, the evaluators only run at the start or the end of the actual state tree. The parameters can't be set during the state tree. So we run into a bit of an issue where we need to get this data and we can't get the data. We could go and set up entirely new conditions to go off cast to the data and get what we need, but that seems very messy when we'd have to recreate pretty much all of them to do the same thing, and we don't want to do that. So just for now, until we figure out how to get data only in the state tree that we need, we don't need to store it anywhere else, I'm actually just going to go and store it on my NPC, pre-casted to what we need. It's not great, but it will work for now. So on our BP NPC, where we've got actor to follow, I'm actually just going to add a temporary one called current patrol point. I'm not going to set it as instance editable, but I am going to set it to a type of BP patrol point, and I'm going to compile and save. And now I'm going to come and modify our AI task of move to patrol point, and just before we actually tell them to move to it, what we are actually going to do is we're simply going to get the NPC owner and we're going to set the current patrol point. Connect this up. And then we're going to set it to the actor to follow, but we're temporarily going to cast to it. Like I say, in the future, we are going to fix this up properly and figure out what's wrong with it. But I think state trees do need a little bit of work, or at least a heavy amount of documentation to cover itself. So I will get the actor to follow, which is a type of actor because we use it generically for everything. And then I'm going to cast it to a BP patrol point. and then I'm going to connect it all up like so. Give ourselves a little bit more space, because we don't want to set the patrol point if it fails to cast to it. So if it fails to cast to it, it means that we've set the actor to follow to something that's not a patrol point, so we'll just fail out of it gracefully. We'll just finish the task like so. And now if we hit compile and save, you will see on our patrol point, should the NPC wait, we can now come in to the operator here to the left, and we can open it up, we can get the current actor, we can get the current patrol point, and we can now choose wait time like that, which is perfect. So our condition will say, only run this one if the enter condition means that the wait time for the current patrol point is more than 0. If it is, then we'll add a task here of delay task, and we will set the duration to the exact same thing, current patrol point wait time. We're not going to add any random deviation or run forever because we don't need it. It's all controlled from there. Now, the keen eyed of you might turn around and say, what's the point of the condition? If you set the delay task to 0, won't it just delay for 0 seconds and move? And you are correct. However, in my experience, when you have if statements around something versus calling something with no time, calling something with no time typically has to do other things to initiate itself to even run for 0 seconds. It has to set the timer up, wait for the timer, tell the timer to wait for 0 seconds, then not wait for 0 seconds, and then run itself straight away. In some instances, you can actually get crashes if you set something to run for 0 seconds, and the timer just flat out either never tells you it finishes or crashes. Whereas with an if statement, we're avoiding all that logic and simply saying, don't even set up a timer, don't plug into the thread to tell it to wait. Just don't. Just check it and run off. So it seems like it's more processing, but deep down, it feels like it might be a lot better. So one thing you may have noticed while I was testing, just to clear up any confusion, just make sure that this has a transition on it of get to new patrol point, so it goes to the final node it needs to go to on completed. And let's see what happens now. And you'll see some unusual behaviour that I'm almost certain is a bug. So you can see he's currently at the first patrol point and he's not doing anything. There's no timer on that one. So why is it not doing anything? And this is the bug I think I found. I was reading the Unreal's documentation, the state trees, when I was trying to figure this out. And right here it says, if the enter conditions do not pass, the selection proceeds to the next sibling state. So what that means is when it comes down to here and it runs a condition, if it doesn't pass it, it doesn't call any transitions, it just goes to the next sibling state. But it doesn't have a sibling state. So what does it do? I'd assume it to call the transitions or go to root or something, but it's not actually doing anything. It just freezes the state tree in place, which has got to be a bug of some kind. But it's actually really easy to fix. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to right click just on this node and add a sibling state, and it'll simply be called actions complete. And all it will have is a transition to go to the next patrol point, which will be this one here. And then on this should NPC wait, instead of having a transition here, I'm simply going to change it to next state. So what it'll do now is it'll get the new patrol point and move to it. It will then set it on our NPC. It'll then come into the custom actions, which simply says run the children, and it'll come to the child. It will check the if statement saying should I wait. If they should, it'll delay it, and then because the task has ran, it will go to the next state, which will be actions complete, but it'll eventually be our other action. However, if the enter condition fails, then according to Unreal's documentation, it will go to the next sibling, which in this case will be the next action, or our actions complete, which simply tells it to go to this. Very weird that you have to do that, but you'll see if we try it now, our guy will start moving and he'll wait at the point, which is perfect. So he'll wait 5 seconds, and then he'll move to the next one, and then the next one, and then he'll wait, because that's the next point. And there we go, ladies and gentlemen. There is our first custom action. So we can now tell each node whether the guard should wait or not. How cool is that? You can even go as far as adding random deviations to it if you want to. So if you want some guards to be more impatient or whatever, you can. You could even add a custom delay task which applies loads of modifiers if your guard's more impatient, less impatient, whatever. So there is our first custom action, which is our should the NPC wait. The next custom action we're going to look at is playing some sort of dialogue, because that's always fun to see, where they go up and they go, cold night tonight, or, something like that. But this is where the tutorial will differ ever so slightly for depending how you want your game to work. So we have this guard here who's running around in a circle around us. We could add his specific dialogue into each of these points. We could say, run this when you get to this state, which will work fine. However, what if we have multiple guards with different voices, different dialogue walking around each one? Then we run into a bit of an issue where this guard doesn't know what to say. So how do we decide which dialogue to play depending on the NPC and depending on the patrol point they arrive at? Because of course we don't want him to say the same thing every single patrol point. So this is where we run into a bit of an issue. Because if we've got two patrol guards here, one of them is walking this way with the patrol and the other is walking the other way, we could say this guard here is female and this guard here is male. So they already have different voices that they need to play when they arrive at each area. So depending on the NPC, we could have the same guard, we could have different guards, we could have different voices, different lines. We also need to tell them to play different things as they arrive at each patrol point. It's some type of three-way variable matrix thing. That sounds really complicated, but the way I've come up with it to crack it, I actually think is really, really nice if I do say so myself. So what we're going to do is we're going to add properties to each patrol point using gameplay tags, which is, I've wanted a way to shoehorn it into a tutorial and I've finally found one, where we can say properties about each patrol point, such as it contains rats, it's got water, it's dark, something like that, some properties that can drive the dialogue. And then what we're also going to do, we're going to add a data asset to each NPC, which will tell them, here's what you say if one of these properties is found. So if we, on this patrol point here, say it contains rats, it's got water, we do 2 of them. When we arrive at this point and we need to play the dialogue, then we turn around and tell the guard, search in your data asset for all your named dialogue lines, find any that contains matching rats and water, store them, then randomize over it and pick a line. And in theory, we should have a nice easy way to tell the guards, if there's rats, you say this. If there's water, you say this. On the patrol points, we can tell them, you have rats, you have water. And then when they arrive, it should play nicely. So let's start with the patrol points. How are we going to add the properties? So there's a couple of ways you could do it. You could just add normal properties like this here. But I think gameplay tags are absolutely perfect for this. If you've never used gameplay tags before, don't get them mixed up with tags, which is what Unreal's default is. We use tags for a lot of things like naming characters and such like that, such as naming characters, finding them in the world. Gameplay tags are different because you're basically specifying a property, a Boolean property about an object, whether or not it has rats, yes or no. If it doesn't, then it won't have the property of has rats. Really, really easy to use. You'll see them on Twitter all the time of people saying, replace your Boolean values with gameplay tags. It's because they are really good. So just go to edit plugins and let's first make sure they're set up. It's built into Unreal, so it shouldn't matter. And if you search for tags, you will see gameplay tags editor is enabled by default in most new projects, but if not, just make sure you've got it enabled. And they're really, really easy to use. So I'm going to come and open up the patrol points and I'm going to simply add a new variable called gameplay tags. And we're just going to set the data type to gameplay tag container, just like so. I'll make sure it's ticked as instance editable. And I'll hit compile and save. Now, how do we add tags? It's super simple. Select the actor you want. So we'll say he starts off there, he waits there for 5 seconds, looks around. Here, we'll want him to say something like, ooh, it's a bit wet here, or, you know, something like that. So in the gameplay tags variable we've created here, if we click the little drop down, we can see a list of all the gameplay tags that Unreal is added by default, so that's all right. If you'll see that these have got folders in them, that's literally just a dot in gameplay tags world. So how do we add our own custom tags? So it's really easy to do. I'm going to come and click the plus here. The source I'm going to set to default gameplay tags.ini, which is a default one Unreal has. You can also create custom ones if you go to manage gameplay tags. And then I'm going to start naming it here. If you want to drop down folder effect like these, you simply just put a dot to add that in. So what we're going to do here. So I'm going to call my first one NPC, so my top level. Then I'm going to put a dot and then I'm going to call it patrol points. So this is only for the patrol point section. Dot dialogue dot, and then this is where we add our properties. So I'm going to type is wet. And because we've already got the source, I'm going to click add new tag and you'll see it's added it there. I'm going to add another property of the same thing. I'm going to add another property to the same area, but this time I'll say has rats and click add new. You see we've now got a couple of gameplay tags that we can apply. We can also apply multiple of them, which is a key thing. But I can come and tick has rats and it'll say that this patrol point has a property of has rats, and we can now make our dialogue say something if it contains rats. But what we can also do is we can just tick is wet as well and do both, or we could simply have these in inner groups as well and say temperature difference, and then we can go based on any of these parents being ticked. This is now where we set up the player's named dialogue is what I'm calling it. So specific lines that they say in specific situations. So we will be doing dialogue for this. So it depends on what dialogue system you have. If you've watched my channel before, you know I'm a big fan of the narrative dialogue and quest plugin. It's a fantastic plugin. It's what I'm building most of my games and most of the client games I work with using. If you don't have that, you just need a way to be able to tell your dialogue to play a specific line. So I'm going to come into my blueprints folder. I'm going to come into my NPCs. I'm going to right click and create a new folder, and I'm going to call it data assets. I'm going to open it up. I'm going to come into my blueprints folder, and I'm going to come into my primary data assets folder here. And a primary data asset, if you've never used them before, is basically like a struct, so a set of variables like a blueprint, except it only handles data, which is exactly what we need. And the benefit of it is it means we can place it on any guards we want. So if we want these two guards to have the same dialogue file, we can just put it on both of them. Whereas if we don't want another guard to have it, we can remove it. So I'm going to come into my content drawer, I'm going to right click blueprint class, and I'm going to search for primary data asset. I'm going to click that one and click select. I'll call it PDA underscore named dialogue. I'm going to open this up. Now in here, it just looks like a normal blueprint class, but we're just going to only add variables. And this is going to build up how our named dialogue will work. So because we need the game to be as random as possible, so it feels more lifelike. The guard's not going to say the same thing every single time he walks up to something. It'll be a bit weird. So we want a variety of dialogue for him to play in certain situations. But we also want a chance modifier if they're actually going to play that. So we actually need an array of things they can play. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a tag container inside here. And I'll just call it has tags, and I'll set it to a gameplay tag container. I'll make it instance editable. And then gameplay tag containers are arrays by default, so we don't need to do anything with those. I'm then going to add a dialogue ID, which will just simply be a string. But I'm going to make it an array by right-clicking it or changing it up here. And this will be the ID of the dialogue that it needs to play. So if you've never used narratives dialogue before, I really actually do recommend it. I'll just come into the Kingsguard one here. Each one of these nodes has an ID that you can call. You may have something else in your own dialogue system, but for me, I'm going to pass it an array of IDs, and if it matches all of these tags, then it'll pick a random one from here and play it. I'll make it instance editable, and then I'll also add a chance to play, and I'll set this back to a single variable by right clicking it or changing it up here, and I'll set this one to a float. So this will be between 0 and 1. It'll just literally tell our task when we're playing this dialogue what the chances are of it actually playing. By default, I'll set it to 1. I'll set it to 0.6. So a little bit more than half the time they will try to play some dialogue. So how do we actually use this named dialogue now? So I'm going to come into my NPCs folder, and I'm going to right click and create a new folder called named dialogue, and I'm going to open it up, and I'm going to use our new primary data asset. So I'm going to right click miscellaneous data asset. I'm going to search for our PDA named dialogue, and I'll call it DA for data asset, and then let's call it guard 1 has rats. Just something simple like that. So it says which NPC it is and the properties that it's looking for. And we'll open this up. You'll see we've now got a nice little interface to add our properties. So what gameplay tags does it need? Well, it needs to have rats. So we'll just tick that one, and you'll see it ticks all the parents. The dialogue ID, we don't actually have any dialogue for this guard, I don't think, at the moment, do we? Let's have a quick look. So we don't know. So let's set up some new dialogue for this guard while we're doing it. So I'm just going to go to narrative dialogues, and wherever your guards are, or whatever dialogue system you're using, set some new dialogue up. Right click narrative dialogue. I'll call it DB underscore patrolling guard 1. I'm going to open this up. Now the key thing for this is it needs to not lock the player when this guard speaks, because you don't want the player to be frozen every time the guard speaks when he finds some rats or says something. So we're going to make sure we tick free movement, which in narrative, that's how we stop it from locking the player. We'll keep can be exited on because the guard might be interrupted at some point, and we'll turn off auto rotate because we don't want that. We don't want any cameras either because that'll just make it look really weird. And we'll go to the dialogue graph. So I'm going to set his speaker to patrolling guard 1. We'll just keep it named him. That can be his name. And I'll delete the text on the first node here. So this is where we start actually creating the dialogue. So I'm going to right click, add dialogue line for patrol guard 1. I'll make sure it's not connected because we don't need it connected to anything. We're just going to tell it jump to this one. We'll give this some text saying rats. typical. Someone should clean up this place. Some basic dialogue just like that. We could also add a voice, but for now we don't have any, so we'll ignore it. We could go in and also add alternative lines here, but you may want some conditioned one, so they may say something else. So just to test our array properly out, I'll add another line just under it, not connected again, talking about the rats, and I'll just say stupid rat. I'll come in and I'll wrap this with a comment and just say contains tag has rats, and they're the two we want him to play. And I'll hit compile and save. I'll then come and copy the ID from the nodes and jump back to our data asset, and I'll add these to our dialog ID array, just like so. And I'll compile and save. So now that we have the different versions of dialog we want to play, and we have our dialog set up, we do actually need to tell our data asset which dialog file to play as well. We could do it per dialog ID, but I think if you're doing that, then it could get a little bit messy. So instead, all I'm going to do is inside here, I'm just going to tell it, actually, out of all the dialog, this is what you can play. I'll call it dialog asset. I'll set it to a type of dialog, and I'll make sure to set it as a class reference because that's how narrative does it. But what I am actually going to do is set it to a soft class reference instead, because then it means it's not loading the entire dialog in memory until we specifically tell it we want it, which is even better for optimization. So now we have our PDA named dialog, and we have all the files that it links up to, and we have our actual dialog. So how do we go about using it? So I'm going to come to my MPC. I'm going to add a new variable called named dialog, and I'm going to add our PDA named dialog. I'm going to right click it, set it as an array, and make it instance edit file and save. So I know that seemed a bit of a setup. It is actually going to be really useful. And now we can come to this guard here. We can search for his named dialog and we can add it, and it'll say which named dialog do you want to use, and I'm going to say has rats. We'll come over to this guard and we'll not give him the has rats because we don't want it to say anything. We now have our NPC with specific lines when those properties exist, and we also have our patrol points which has the gameplay tags has rats. So all we need to do is check when those two match up, and then we can play the dialogue based on the random chance. So if we now go back to our state tree, above actions complete, but below should NPC wait, we'll add a new sibling state and we'll call it should NPC dialogue. And this is where we now create a new task to actually play the dialogue. I'm going to come to my tasks folder in my AI tasks. I'm going to right click blueprint and I'll search for state tree task. I'll click state tree task blueprint base, and I'll call it STT underscore play named dialog, and I'll open it up. I'll override the enter state function. And now, how do we go about playing the dialog? So there are a couple of things we need to consider before we can actually just start playing it. If the guard is here and we're all the way over here, does he really need to play the dialog? No, he doesn't, not at all. Because in narrative, the dialogue I'm using, only one person can really speak at once, which is how you want it to work. You don't want multiple people speaking at once. You sometimes think you do, but then when you hear it, it's a bit of a mess. And if you've got a crowd going, you can never pinpoint specifically what people are saying anyway. So at that point, you'll just have some ambient music playing of noise, of vocal noise. So all the way over here, we don't want him to play. So I think the first thing we should do is actually check the distance between the player and whether we should play it or not. Because if they're too far away, then we don't need to play the dialogue at all. So the first thing in here I'm going to do is simply do get player pawn, and I'm going to get their location with get actor location, and then I'm going to drag off of this and do distance vector, and then we need to compare it to the NPC. So we need to pass our NPC into the task. I'll add a new variable and I'll call it NPC owner, and I'll set it to a type of BP NPC because that's the owner of it. And just like we did before, I'll make sure it's in the category of input. I'll hit compile and save. I can now drag this NPC owner in, do get actor location, and I can plug it in. So now we have a simple distance check to whether or not we should actually play the dialogue. If we say only if the player is less than, let's say 1,000. So only if they're in range of 1,000 units do we actually want to play the dialogue. We might have to tinker with this number at some point. And then if it's false, then we'll just do finish task. Make sure you always call finish task, otherwise
you're gonna have a bad time.
Then now we know we actually want to play the dialogue. So if we drag our NPC owner in, let's get the current patrol path. So we'll do get current patrol point. So this tells us what we need to do. And then from here, we can check if they've got any tags. So we do get gameplay tags. From this, we can now use some of the built-in events, such as has tag, and we can simply check if they've got any dialogue. And that's all we're going to do for this one. We're not ticking any specific ones just yet. We're simply saying, is there any dialogue they actually need to play at this patrol point? And then we can add this to a condition and pass it back. Again, if there's nothing to play, we're just going to call finish task. But if there is something to play, then now we have the list of gameplay tags that we actually need to play. So now we need to compare it to the actual NPC's tags. So if we drag off the NPC and get their named dialogue, We can then loop over this one, and then we can drag off of this, and we can now do get on all of our variables that belong to it. So the variable we want to compare in this case is the has tags here. Then I'm going to drag off of this and do has any tags, like so. And we can plug in our other container, and we're going to also tick exact match. The reason we're ticking exact match is if you remember when we set the tags up, we don't want it to only run if it has some parents, like dialogue. We want it to run if it exactly has rats or is wet. We don't want it to run for multiple, and then we'll add a branch to it. So if we hit false, then we can just ignore this tag because we know we're not going to use it. However, if it's true, now we need to actually decide, are we actually going to use this tag? Because we have the random chance, don't we, that they can say anything. So I'm going to drag off of the array element, and I'm going to type get chance for our chance to play. And then next to here, I'm going to right click and do random bool with weight. And the with weight property is useful because we can plug our chance to play straight into it, add a branch. So now if we set our chance to play to 1, this bool will always be true. If we set it to 0, it will always be false. If we set it to 0.5, it'll be 50-50%. That'll do it. Don't worry about this false on either of these because it's just going to come back to the loop and continue. But if we hit true and we hit true on this one, then we've basically got our dialogue that we can play. Because at this point, we've checked if the player's in range. We've checked if they've actually got the tags they need. We've also checked if they match any tags we want to use. And we've checked the random chance that says, are we okay to play it? At this point, I'm pretty confident we can play it. So I'm going to right click and do get narrative component because this is how I start my dialogue. And then I'm going to drag off this and do begin dialogue. So this is getting really messy. So I think we should convert it to a function instead, just so it's a lot nicer to read and use. I'm going to come and create a new function called can play dialogue. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to click the function and make sure it's got an output of a boolean saying can play. And this will be true or false, true if it can play, false if it can't. And then I'll just move this up here and remove the arrow. I'll then come and copy pretty much all of the code. It won't let you paste in the finished tasks because it likes to keep those in the event graph. I'll paste it in here, and basically wherever we have a finished task that it will let us do for now, but it'll probably error later, we're just going to return false instead. We'll put this up here. We'll return false. We will return false here as well. And now the benefit of using a function, if we move all this bit across here, we can promote this array element to a local variable, meaning it doesn't exist for the entire scope of the task, only when this function is being called. So I will call this current named dialog, and I'll plug it in, and then we can plug this into the target here, connect it across. Now we don't need to stretch this all the way over here. We can just use current named dialog, which is a lot nicer. And then for the dialog, we can drag in the current named dialog, get dialog asset, and we want to load this in memory, but it's a soft class. If we try to load this into memory, it's going to be blocking, meaning our thread will temporarily halt. Now it shouldn't be very much, but it's still not very nice to do. So what we are actually going to do is delete this begin dialog node off, and instead I'm going to add another return node here, and then I'm going to drag this current name dialog into it here. I'll rename it to selected dialog, and we will return can play as true. So what we're doing, just to run over this function again, we're first checking if the player is in range. If they aren't, then we return false. If they are in range, it means we can play the dialog. We check if the patrol point actually has any tags to play. If it isn't, we return false. If they do, then we check the NPC's tags. If the NPC has the right tags, such as has rats, then we check if they randomly are allowed to. If they are, then we return the dialog and say, play this dialog, we've selected it. However, if these two are false, then it'll come back to the loop and keep looping over it. If every single node runs and they all return false, so it can't select a dialog either by chance or they don't have anything, then on completed, we just return false as well. That is pretty much the code we need. There is one small flaw with the way we've done it for now, which I will explain to you, is this is a very first come, first served dialog. So it'll come to the NPC, it'll go to the first named dialog, check that and run that. It's not going to randomize over them as such. You could easily achieve this by modifying your task to add all of the selected ones to an array and then return on the array. For me, I'm okay with the way it is here. I think the random chances will be good enough for it to go down and select one. So now that our function returns it, we can basically come into here and wipe pretty much all of this off. So we can drag our can play dialog into it. The first thing we'll do is check the can play. If it's false, then we just finish the task. We know we can't do it. We've failed it. Or we've not failed it. We're not proceeding with this task. If it's true, then now we can drag the selected dialog in and we can do get dialog asset. We can also tell it to async load it, so it's no longer going to lock our thread, which is very nice. So there's going to be no game stutters, it'll do it in the background. And then once it's completed, now we can do get narrative component and call begin dialogue like so. We can plug the class into it. You'll see it won't let you do it. So what we'll do instead is from the dialogue asset, just type resolve and plug it in. Now you must make sure that you call async load first. Otherwise resolve, if resolve can't get the item already in memory, as you can see on the tooltip, then it will return none, meaning it will fail. So you've got to call load, so it loads it into memory on here, then you resolve it to what it needs to be. The only last thing we need to do is tell it which ID to play. So we can drag off select dialogue, do get dialogue ID, and then from here we can just call random, and we can plug it in like so. And then after this, we can simply call finish task. And after this, we can hit compile and save. So that was quite a setup, ladies and gentlemen. I will try to put these files in the description if you want to access them. And now if we go back to our state tree, NPC has dialogue, we can simply add the task of play named dialogue. We can pass in the NPC owner like so, and we can hit compile and save. The last thing we need to do is just add a transition telling it to go to the next sibling like so, to go to the next state so it keeps going down. And the last thing I need to do on mine, at least, is to actually just tell it to add my normal ALS character in. But because my normal ALS character isn't there, it doesn't know how to play narrative dialogue. And now let's try it, ladies and gentlemen. So in theory, this guard should walk to this state tree and wait for 5 seconds. He then should walk to this state tree and then do a random chance whether or not he's going to complain about the rats. So now if we try it, you can see he will run, he'll stop there, and then after 5 seconds he should come here and randomly chance whether or not he'll talk about the rats. So he didn't decide to talk about the rats this time. Let's see if he does it on the round 2. So I'm temporarily going to remove the 5-second wait just so we can get straight to there. So I've temporarily disabled the 5-second wait just so we go straight to there. You can see stupid rats. He complained about it, ladies and gentlemen. How cool is that? So if we come and put the 5-second delay back in just for a moment, that one will say about the rats. Let's try it. So you can see he will now run up, he'll wait for 5 seconds, and then hopefully after he leaves, he should complain about the rats in this area. Rats, typical. Someone should clean this place up. Awesome. How cool is that, ladies and gentlemen? Now let's see him walk around again. He'll run around this area, then he'll wait for 5 seconds again because that's what we've told him to do in that area. Maybe there's a jail cell, maybe he's looking at the sunrise, could be anything. And then rats typically only play the same line. There we go, ladies and gentlemen. How cool is that? We now have a patrol guard where we can add special actions to him, such as telling him to wait or telling him to play a dialogue line. We can expand this to do very many things now. We can have each patrol point talk about the water or do anything, and all we have to do is tell the guard, here's your named dialogue assets, here's what you say in these situations. That's it. So just running over it one more time, because I know it's a little bit of a complex setup. But from the beginning, let's say this area here where they're waiting, we can say it's a bit wet and we want him to complain about that. We'll then come to the guard here. We'll add a new named dialogue. So we'll come to our folder in blueprints, NPCs, named dialogue. I'll just duplicate this one for ease sake. EA guard 1 is wet, and I'll open this up. So we only want it to run this one if it's got the tag of is wet. And then the chances to play, I'll set to 1 just for now, but I'm pretty sure it will work for the most of the part. The dialogue asset is our patrol guard 1. So let's go in and give him some lines. So we'll say, where's this puddle coming from? We can also give it an alternative line if we really wanted to. So we'll say, ugh, I just cleaned my boots. And we'll just give him that one for this one. And we can hit compile and save. Go back to the is wet. We'll paste it in and remove the old one. And now all we have to do is go back to our guard and add the new is wet named dialogue for this specific guard. And now if we play it when he runs around to the other end, he should successfully tell us that he's not a fan of his boots getting wet. And we'll wait at this one for 5 seconds. He'll then run to this one and complain about the rats because I set it to the chance of 1. Stupid rats. Perfect. Now he'll wait here. After 5 seconds, he then should move on to the dialogue and complain. I just cleaned my boots. How good is that, ladies and gentlemen? So cool. If you wanted him to play the dialogue while he's waiting, which does sound like a better thing in my opinion, I'm actually just going to come and move the dialogue above the delay. The delay will freeze the state tree at that point. So now he's got the chance to play the dialogue. In the next tutorial, because this one's getting very, very long, we'll add some animations to it. We can play the animations and then make it final level wait for it to complete. But if I just come and remove the 5-second delay off here, so we just run straight past it, and now you'll see if we try it again, he should now walk up to here, skip past it because we removed it, complain about the rats, and then as he arrives here and waits, the dialogue is already playing, which works really, really well because he's just got there. How cool is that, ladies and gentlemen? We now have a much more interactive guard. And of course, if we do come in and we tweak it so it says only 0.6 of the time he will actually say this, and you can set it to whatever numbers you want, then he's not going to say something every time. There you go, he played at that time, but this time he doesn't want to say anything while he stood there in the puddle. There we go. How cool is that? Thank you for watching, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you liked it. If you do have any improvements, please let me know. In the next tutorial, we're going to advance upon the custom actions by adding some custom animations to it. So I do officially have a mocap suit now. It is incredible. I've been recording loads of different animations to use in the game. I am going to give away some of them for free, so you will be able to watch the tutorial and actually follow it. And then some others I will link on my Patreon. Lowest price, £1. You can simply sign up and you'll get access to all the free animations. It does help support me and help pay the very expensive mocap suit off. So thank you for watching. If you've got any suggestions, please let me know. My name's Decryption and I will see you next time.